The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling complex of Fort Kellerman's Motor Pool Division as Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell pulled her duffel bag from the back of the transport truck. The familiar scent of motor oil, diesel fuel, and hot metal filled her nostrils, combination that had become as comforting as home-cooked meals during her 10 years of military service. At 28, Sarah carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that actions spoke louder than words, especially in environments where being underestimated had become a constant companion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Motor Pool Division stretched across 12 acres of the base, housing everything from standard transport vehicles to specialized engineering equipment that kept the entire installation operational. Massive garage bays lined the main building, their overhead doors already rolled up to reveal the organized chaos of military vehicle maintenance. The sound of air wrenches, hydraulic lifts, and shouted instructions created a symphony that Sarah recognized from countless previous assignments. Her transfer orders had been surprisingly specific about her new assignment as lead diagnostic specialist for the heavy equipment maintenance section. Most transfers came with generic job descriptions and flexible placement options, but this position had been tailored to her exact qualifications in a way that suggested someone had specifically requested her skills. The paperwork mentioned working with specialized equipment requiring advanced diagnostic capabilities, though it provided no additional details about what that might entail. Sarah adjusted the weight of her toolkit case, a custom-built aluminum container that had followed her through 3 different base assignments and 2 overseas deployments. Inside were precision instruments that most mechanics never had occasion to use, diagnostic equipment that cost more than most soldiers' annual salaries, and specialized tools that had been acquired through years of solving problems that standard military procedures couldn't address. The case showed wear from constant use, but every instrument inside was maintained to laboratory standards. The administrative building stood adjacent to the main garage complex, its brick facade displaying unit insignia and achievement awards that spoke to the motor pool's reputation for operational excellence. Sarah had researched Fort Kellerman before accepting the transfer, learning that the base supported some of the military's most technologically advanced equipment and served as a testing ground for experimental vehicles that wouldn't be deployed to standard units for several years. As she approached the main entrance, Sarah noticed the parking area filled with vehicles that represented the cutting edge of military transportation technology. Advanced reconnaissance vehicles with sophisticated communication arrays, armored personnel carriers featuring experimental armor configurations, and several pieces of equipment that she couldn't immediately identify, but recognized as representing significant technological investment. This wasn't a typical motor pool assignment focused on maintaining standard trucks and transport vehicles. The glass doors of the administrative building reflected her image as she approached a woman of average height with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in regulation style, wearing clean but well-used utility uniforms that showed the subtle signs of someone who worked with machinery for a living. Small scars on her hands told stories of encounters with sharp metal and hot engines, while the confident way she carried her toolkit suggested familiarity with equipment that went far beyond basic maintenance procedures. Inside the building, the reception area displayed photographs showcasing the motor pool's history, including images of soldiers working on everything from World War II Jeeps to modern combat vehicles. The photos told a story of technological evolution and adaptation, with each generation of military personnel learning to maintain increasingly sophisticated equipment. Sarah paused to examine a recent photograph showing a team of mechanics working on what appeared to be an experimental hybrid engine system, noting the complexity of the diagnostic equipment they were using. "You must be Staff Sergeant Mitchell," said a voice from behind the reception desk. A young soldier with private first-class insignia stood up from his computer workstation, extending his hand with genuine enthusiasm. "I'm PFC Danny Richardson. I'll be helping you get oriented today. Welcome to Fort Kellerman's Motor Pool Division." "Thank you, Private Richardson," Sarah replied, appreciating the straightforward professionalism of his greeting. "I understand I'll be working with the heavy equipment maintenance section. Can you tell me a bit about what that involves?" Richardson's expression brightened with obvious pride in his unit. "Yes, ma'am. You'll be working in Building C, which houses our most advanced diagnostic and repair facilities. The section handles maintenance for specialized vehicles that require, well, let's just say they require more sophisticated attention than standard military equipment. Your supervisor, Master Sergeant Angela Rodriguez, asked me to bring you directly to her office once you arrived." As they walked through corridors lined with technical manuals and equipment specifications, Sarah noticed that the documentation was more detailed and complex than what she had encountered at previous assignments. Maintenance schedules included procedures for systems she recognized from her advanced training, but had rarely seen implemented in field conditions. The level of technical sophistication suggested that Fort Kellerman's motor pool operated at a significantly higher level than typical base maintenance facilities. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez has been with the heavy equipment section for 8 years, Richardson continued as they navigated toward Building C. "She's got a reputation for being extremely competent and fair, but she expects the same level of expertise from everyone in her section. The work here is challenging, but it's also some of the most advanced vehicle maintenance being done anywhere in the military." Building C was noticeably different from the standard garage facilities Sarah had seen earlier. The exterior featured additional security measures, including card access entry points and small signs indicating that certain areas required special clearance. Through large windows, she could see garage bays equipped with diagnostic equipment that looked more like laboratory instruments than typical automotive tools. Several vehicles visible through the windows were covered with tarps, suggesting that some of the equipment housed here wasn't meant for casual observation. Master Sergeant Angela Rodriguez's office was located on the second floor, overlooking the main garage area through floor-to-ceiling windows that provided a comprehensive view of the work being performed below. Rodriguez stood up from her desk as Sarah entered, extending her hand with the firm grip of someone accustomed to hands-on work with heavy machinery. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell, welcome to Fort Kellerman," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of managing complex technical operations. "I've been looking forward to your arrival. Your background in advanced diagnostics is exactly what we need for some of the challenges we're facing here." Rodriguez was a woman in her early 40s with graying hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested she had earned her position through demonstrated competence rather than administrative advancement. Her office walls displayed certifications in various specialized maintenance procedures, photographs from successful complex repair operations, and a commendation from the Secretary of Defense recognizing innovative solutions to critical equipment challenges affecting national security operations. "Thank you, Master Sergeant," Sarah replied. "I'm eager to learn about the specific equipment I'll be working with. My transfer orders mentioned specialized vehicles, but didn't provide details about the types of systems involved." Rodriguez gestured toward the chairs facing her desk, settling back into her own seat with the easy confidence of someone comfortable discussing complex technical subjects. "The vehicles we maintain here represent some of the most advanced technology currently being field tested by the military. We're talking about hybrid propulsion systems, experimental armor configurations, and electronic warfare capabilities that won't be deployed to standard units for several years." She paused, pulling a thick folder from her desk drawer and placing it between them. "Your background includes specialized training in electronic systems diagnostics, advanced mechanical troubleshooting, and most importantly for our purposes, experience with experimental equipment that doesn't have standard maintenance protocols. Is that an accurate assessment of your qualifications? Yes, ma'am, Sarah confirmed. I've worked with prototype systems during my previous assignments, including several projects where we had to develop diagnostic procedures for equipment that was still being refined by the manufacturers. I'm comfortable working without standard manuals when necessary. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Excellent. Because that's exactly what you'll be doing here. About 30% of the equipment we maintain doesn't have published maintenance procedures yet. We're often working directly with engineers and manufacturers to develop the protocols that will eventually become standard military procedure. Through the office windows, Sarah could see mechanics working on a vehicle that appeared to be a hybrid between a standard military truck and something significantly more sophisticated. The amount of diagnostic equipment surrounding the vehicle suggested that this wasn't routine maintenance, but rather complex troubleshooting of advanced systems. Your primary responsibility, Rodriguez continued, will be leading diagnostic operations for our most challenging cases. Equipment that has defeated our standard troubleshooting procedures, vehicles with intermittent problems that standard diagnostic equipment can't identify, and systems that require the kind of creative problem-solving that goes beyond following established procedures. Sarah felt the familiar excitement that came with challenging technical problems. Throughout her military career, she had gravitated toward the assignments that other mechanics found frustrating or impossible, building a reputation for solving problems that required both technical expertise and innovative thinking. I notice the security measures here are more extensive than typical motor pool facilities, Sarah observed. Should I assume that some of the equipment I'll be working on involves classified systems? You have appropriate security clearance for everything you'll encounter, Rodriguez replied carefully. But yes, some of our vehicles incorporate technology that requires discretion. Nothing you can't handle based on your background, but it does mean that certain aspects of your work here won't be discussed outside of authorized personnel. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Richardson appeared with a clipboard and an expression that suggested he was delivering information that required immediate attention. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, he said, building. C-Bay 7 is reporting problems with the experimental reconnaissance vehicle again. Master Sergeant Thompson says they've exhausted their standard diagnostic procedures and are requesting specialist assistance. Rodriguez looked at Sarah with a slight smile that suggested this might be an opportunity rather than just an interruption. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, would you be interested in getting started immediately? We have a vehicle downstairs that's been giving our best mechanics fits for the past week. It might be a good introduction to the kind of challenges you'll be facing here. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah stood up, automatically reaching for her toolkit case. I'd be happy to take a look, Master Sergeant. What kind of symptoms are they experiencing? Intermittent power loss during acceleration, but only under specific load conditions that they haven't been able to replicate consistently, Rodriguez explained as they headed toward the door. The engine diagnostics show no problems. The electrical systems check out perfectly, and the mechanical components all appear to be functioning within normal parameters. As they walked toward the staircase leading to the garage level, Sarah was already mentally running through the diagnostic procedures she would use to approach this type of problem. Intermittent issues were often the most challenging because they required patience and systematic elimination of variables until the root cause became apparent. Has anyone checked the integration between the hybrid propulsion system and the standard mechanical drivetrain? She asked. Sometimes problems that appear to be power-related are actually coordination issues between multiple systems that are designed to work together. Rodriguez paused at the top of the staircase, her expression showing approval for the direction of Sarah's thinking. That's exactly the kind of diagnostic approach we need. Our mechanics are excellent with standard systems, but when you're dealing with experimental equipment where multiple advanced technologies have to coordinate seamlessly, it requires a different level of systematic analysis. The garage area of Building C was impressive in its organization and technological sophistication. Each bay was equipped with diagnostic computers, precision measurement tools, and hydraulic systems that could handle everything from small reconnaissance vehicles to heavy engineering equipment. The mechanics working throughout the space moved with the confident efficiency of personnel who were accustomed to working with expensive and complex machinery. Bay 7 housed the experimental reconnaissance vehicle that had been causing problems, surrounded by diagnostic equipment and several mechanics who were discussing possible approaches to identifying the source of the intermittent power loss. The vehicle itself was unlike anything Sarah had seen in standard military service, sleek, low profile, and obviously incorporating technology that represented significant research and development investment. Master Sergeant Robert Thompson approached as Rodriguez and Sarah entered the Bay Area. Thompson was a solidly built man in his mid-30s with the methodical bearing of someone who approached mechanical problems with systematic precision and patience. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez," Thompson said, "we've tried everything in the diagnostic manual, plus several procedures we developed for similar hybrid systems. The problem occurs approximately once every 15 minutes during acceleration under load, but we can't identify any pattern or consistent trigger." Rodriguez gestured towards Sarah. "Master Sergeant Thompson, this is Staff Sergeant Mitchell, our new lead diagnostic specialist. She has extensive experience with experimental systems and troubleshooting procedures for equipment that doesn't have standard protocols." Thompson extended his hand with obvious relief. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell, we could definitely use some fresh perspective on this problem. We've been working on it for 6 days, and we're starting to run out of ideas." Sarah approached the vehicle, immediately noting the sophisticated integration of systems that were clearly designed to work together in ways that went beyond standard military equipment. The reconnaissance vehicle incorporated hybrid propulsion, advanced communication arrays, and armor configurations that suggested it was designed for specialized missions requiring both stealth and technological capability. "Can you show me the diagnostic data you've collected so far?" she asked, settling her toolkit case on a nearby work surface and opening it to reveal the precision instruments inside. "And I'd like to hear a detailed description of exactly what happens during the power loss incidents." As Thompson began explaining their troubleshooting efforts and the symptoms they had documented, Sarah found herself feeling genuinely excited about the technical challenge ahead. This was exactly the kind of complex problem-solving that had drawn her to advanced mechanical work, and the sophisticated equipment surrounding her suggested that Fort Kellerman's Motor Pool Division would provide opportunities to work at the highest levels of military vehicle technology. The morning sun continued to stream through the large garage windows, illuminating a workspace where cutting-edge technology met the timeless challenge of understanding how complex systems could work together reliably under demanding conditions. Sarah Mitchell had arrived at her new assignment, and the real work was about to begin. The garage bay felt noticeably quieter as Sarah opened her toolkit and began examining the experimental reconnaissance vehicle. What had been casual conversation and the normal sounds of work in progress shifted to something more deliberate, voices lowered, tools set down with more precision, and the unmistakable feeling of being observed and evaluated rather than simply welcomed as a new team member. Sergeant First Class Mark Williams was the first to break the subtle tension, his voice carrying just enough volume to reach the small group of mechanics who had gathered around neighboring workstations. "So Rodriguez finally got her diversity hire," he muttered while adjusting a wrench that didn't need adjusting. "Wonder how long it'll take before she's asking us to show her where the oil dipstick is located." The comment hung in the air like Exhaust fumes in a poorly ventilated garage. Sarah maintained her professional focus on the diagnostic computer screen in front of her, but she had heard similar remarks enough times throughout her military career to recognize both the intent and the dynamic that was being established. She continued reviewing the data Thompson had collected, though she was acutely aware that her response to this moment would influence every subsequent interaction with her new colleagues. Specialist James Burke, a younger mechanic working on hydraulic systems 2 bays over, shook his head with theatrical disappointment. "I heard they're pushing through transfers now based on meeting quotas rather than actual mechanical competence. No offense to anyone specifically, but when you're dealing with million-dollar experimental equipment, maybe qualifications should matter more than demographics." Sarah noted the careful phrasing of Burke's comment, technically directed at no one in particular, but obviously intended to establish his skepticism about her presence in the advanced diagnostic section. She had learned through experience that responding to such comments often created more problems than ignoring them, but the systematic nature of the remarks suggested this wasn't casual conversation, but rather a coordinated effort to establish social hierarchy and her place within it. Master Sergeant Thompson glanced uncomfortably between Sarah and the mechanics who were making these observations, clearly recognizing the unprofessional nature of the commentary, but uncertain about how to address it without escalating the situation. His position as a senior NCO meant he had authority to shut down the conversation, but doing so might create the impression that Sarah needed protection rather than being capable of handling workplace dynamics herself. The diagnostic data shows power fluctuations that correspond with the hybrid systems transition protocols, Sarah said, addressing Thompson directly while ignoring the background commentary. "Has anyone checked the calibration between the electric motor integration and the traditional drivetrain engagement timing?" Her question was technically sophisticated and immediately shifted the conversation toward the mechanical problem they were supposed to be solving. Thompson's expression showed relief at having a professional focus rather than dealing with personnel conflicts, and he moved closer to examine the diagnostic screen Sarah was indicating. "We ran standard calibration checks," Thompson replied. "But the hybrid integration protocols for this vehicle are more complex than anything we've worked with before. The timing sequences involve multiple systems that have to coordinate within millisecond precision." Sergeant Williams continued his commentary, though now he was addressing it to Burke rather than speaking to the bay in general. "Problem with bringing in specialists who haven't worked with our specific equipment is they assume their previous experience applies to systems they've never seen before. Different bases use different procedures, and what works somewhere else might not be appropriate for the complexity we're dealing with here." The implication was clear. Sarah's transfer from another base meant she lacked familiarity with Fort Kellerman's specific equipment and procedures, making her qualifications irrelevant to their current challenges. It was a technically reasonable observation that would be difficult to challenge directly, but the timing and tone made it obvious that the comment was designed to undermine confidence in her capabilities. Sarah pulled up additional diagnostic screens, cross-referencing power distribution data with timing sequences from the hybrid systems coordination protocols. The integration timing is actually consistent with standard hybrid coordination procedures, she observed, but there's a variance pattern in the electric motor's response time that suggests potential electromagnetic interference from the communication array systems. Her analysis was becoming more specific and technically detailed, demonstrating familiarity with complex systems integration that went beyond basic mechanical knowledge. Thompson leaned closer to examine the data correlations she was highlighting, his expression showing genuine interest in her diagnostic approach. "Electromagnetic interference between systems wasn't something we considered," Thompson admitted. "The communication arrays are supposed to be shielded to prevent exactly that kind of interference. But if there's a manufacturing defect or installation error..." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. pulling up specifications for the vehicle's electromagnetic shielding protocols. The symptoms you described, intermittent power loss during acceleration, under load, would be consistent with interference that occurs only when multiple systems are operating at maximum capacity simultaneously. Specialist Burke had moved closer to their workstation, apparently drawn by the technical discussion, despite his earlier skepticism about Sarah's qualifications. "How would you test for that kind of interference?" he asked, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than the dismissive attitude he had displayed earlier. "Spectrum analysis during normal operation versus operation with the communication systems disabled," Sarah replied, opening her toolkit to reveal diagnostic equipment that was clearly more sophisticated than the standard tools most mechanics carried. "If electromagnetic interference is causing the integration problems, the power fluctuations should disappear when the communication arrays are not active." The diagnostic equipment in Sarah's toolkit immediately drew attention from the mechanics who could see it. Her spectrum analyzer was a precision instrument that cost more than most soldiers earned in 6 months, and the additional testing equipment suggested access to resources that went far beyond typical military mechanic allocations. Sergeant Williams examined the equipment with obvious surprise, though his expression still carried skepticism about Sarah's overall capabilities. "That's some expensive diagnostic gear," he observed. "Most bases don't budget for that level of testing equipment unless they're dealing with really specialized applications." "Previous assignments involved prototype testing," Sarah replied simply, not elaborating on the specific nature of those assignments or why she had been selected for work that required such sophisticated diagnostic capabilities. She began connecting the spectrum analyzer to the vehicle systems, preparing to run tests that would either confirm or eliminate electromagnetic interference as the source of the power fluctuations. The lunch break arrived before Sarah could complete her diagnostic procedures, creating a natural pause in the technical work, but unfortunately providing an opportunity for social dynamics to resume without the distraction of professional problem-solving. The garage bay's break area was located adjacent to the main workspace, with tables and vending machines arranged to provide a casual gathering place for informal conversation during meal periods. Sarah found herself sitting alone at a corner table with her lunch, surrounded by the ambient noise of colleagues who had naturally grouped themselves according to existing friendships and shared experiences from previous assignments. No one had explicitly excluded her from their conversations, but no one had extended invitations to join their discussions either, creating the kind of social isolation that felt deliberate rather than coincidental. "She knows her equipment," she overheard Sergeant Williams saying to a group near the vending machines, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry across the break area. "I'll give her that much credit. But knowing how to use fancy diagnostic tools doesn't necessarily translate to understanding the practical realities of maintaining complex systems under field conditions." Burke nodded thoughtfully, adding his own perspective to Williams' assessment. "And let's be honest about the bigger picture here. Fort Kellerman gets evaluated on our integration success metrics. Command has incentives to make sure certain demographic targets are met, regardless of whether those targets actually improve our operational effectiveness." The conversation was professionally devastating in its implications. Even if Sarah demonstrated technical competence, her success would be attributed to institutional bias rather than individual capability. And if she encountered any difficulties or made any mistakes, those would be interpreted as confirmation of their original assumptions about her qualifications. Thompson joined the conversation, though his tone suggested he was attempting to moderate rather than contribute to the skepticism. Rodriguez wouldn't have requested her transfer if she didn't think Sarah could handle the work. Master Sergeant Rodriguez has a reputation for prioritizing operational effectiveness over everything else. Rodriguez has to work within the system. "Like everyone else," Williams replied. When personnel decisions come down from higher command levels, section leaders don't always have as much control over assignments as we might prefer. The best we can do is make sure everyone gets adequate supervision and support. The implication that Sarah would need adequate supervision because she couldn't be trusted to work independently was both insulting and strategically positioned to sound like reasonable management rather than discriminatory treatment. Williams had successfully framed additional oversight as responsible leadership rather than evidence of bias or lack of confidence in her abilities. Sarah finished her lunch methodically, maintaining the same professional routine she had followed throughout her military career. She had learned through experience that responding emotionally to such conversations only confirmed negative assumptions about her suitability for demanding technical work. Her strategy had always been to let her performance speak for itself, though she was beginning to recognize that at Fort Kellerman, her performance might not be evaluated objectively. The afternoon session began with Master Sergeant Rodriguez conducting a brief progress review with Thompson and Sarah, asking for updates on the reconnaissance vehicle's diagnostic status and timeline for identifying the source of the power fluctuations. The meeting took place in Thompson's smaller office adjacent to the garage bay, providing privacy for discussions about technical procedures and resource allocation. Sarah's initial analysis suggests electromagnetic interference between the hybrid propulsion system and the communication arrays, Thompson reported. She's prepared to run spectrum analysis tests that should confirm or eliminate that as the source of our problems. Rodriguez nodded approvingly, her expression showing satisfaction with the systematic approach to problem solving. How long do you estimate for completing the diagnostic procedures and implementing whatever corrections are necessary? If the electromagnetic interference theory is correct, Sarah replied, we should be able to confirm it within 2 hours and develop corrective procedures by the end of the week. If it's not interference, we'll have eliminated one major possibility and can move on to other potential causes. Excellent, Rodriguez said. This vehicle is scheduled for field testing next month, so resolving the power fluctuation issue is critical for staying on schedule. I appreciate you jumping right into our most challenging current problem. As they returned to the garage bay to resume diagnostic work, Sarah noticed that the social dynamics had shifted again. The mechanics who had been openly skeptical during the morning were now watching her work with the kind of careful attention that suggested they were looking for evidence to support their preconceived conclusions rather than simply observing. Her professional procedures, Specialist Burke positioned himself at a nearby workstation where he could observe Sarah's diagnostic procedures while appearing to focus on his own responsibilities. Sergeant Williams found reasons to walk past Bay 7 frequently, each time glancing at Sarah's equipment setup and testing procedures with expressions that suggested he was evaluating her competence. The spectrum analysis requires running the vehicle systems at various load levels while monitoring electromagnetic emissions, Sarah explained to Thompson, who was assisting with the testing procedures. We'll need to coordinate with communication array activation to identify any correlation between the interference patterns and the power fluctuation incidents. Her testing procedures were methodical and technically sophisticated, involving equipment and analytical techniques that clearly exceeded standard military mechanic training. The precision instruments she used required specialized knowledge to operate effectively, and her familiarity with complex electromagnetic analysis demonstrated expertise that couldn't be learned through basic technical training. However, instead of generating respect or recognition for her capabilities, the sophisticated nature of her diagnostic approach seemed to create additional skepticism among the mechanics who were observing her work. The more advanced her procedures appeared, the more her colleagues seemed to question whether such elaborate testing was necessary or appropriate for their operational environment. Most of the vehicles we maintain here don't require that level of diagnostic complexity, Williams observed to Burke during one of his frequent passes through Bay 7. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one. And overcomplicating the troubleshooting process can waste time and resources. Burke agreed enthusiastically. Exactly. When you have expensive equipment and tight schedules, you need efficient solutions rather than theoretical approaches that might work in laboratory conditions but aren't practical for field operations. Sarah continued her testing procedures, noting significant electromagnetic emissions that correlated directly with the timing of the power fluctuation incidents Thomson had documented. The evidence was becoming clear that her initial hypothesis about interference between systems was correct, and the corrective procedures would involve adjusting shielding configurations rather than major mechanical repairs. But as she prepared to present her findings to Thomson and develop implementation procedures for eliminating the electromagnetic interference, Sarah realized that her technical success was creating new challenges rather than resolving the fundamental problems she was facing at Fort Kellerman. Competence, it seemed, was necessary but not sufficient for changing her colleagues' assumptions about her presence in the heavy equipment maintenance section. The afternoon sun cast longer shadows through the garage windows as Sarah worked to complete her diagnostic analysis, surrounded by sophisticated equipment and complex technical challenges, but also by professional dynamics that had nothing to do with her actual job performance and everything to do with other people's preconceptions about who belonged in positions requiring advanced technical expertise. The second week at Fort Kellerman brought an escalation in both the complexity of Sarah's assignments and the systematic challenges to her professional credibility. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had assigned her to lead a multi-vehicle diagnostic project involving 3 experimental armored personnel carriers that had been experiencing coordinated system failures during field exercises. The vehicles represented cutting-edge military technology worth over $15 million each, and their operational reliability was critical for an upcoming evaluation by Pentagon procurement officials. These aren't isolated mechanical problems, Rodriguez explained during Monday morning's briefing in her office. All 3 vehicles are experiencing similar failure patterns during coordinated operations, but they test perfectly when operated individually. Something about their interaction during joint exercises is causing system conflicts that our standard diagnostic procedures haven't been able to identify. Sarah studied the technical reports spread across Rodriguez's desk, noting the sophisticated nature of the coordination systems that allowed the armored personnel carriers to operate as integrated units during combat scenarios. The vehicles featured experimental communication networks, shared tactical displays, and coordinated defensive systems that were designed to function as a unified defensive platform rather than 3 separate units. The Pentagon evaluation is scheduled for 6 weeks from today, Rodriguez continued. If we can't resolve these coordination failures, the entire program could be canceled, affecting procurement decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm assigning you as lead diagnostic specialist because your background with experimental systems integration makes you our best option for solving this type of complex problem. The assignment was both an honor and a challenge that carried significant career implications. Success would demonstrate Sarah's capabilities at the highest levels of military vehicle technology, while failure would affect not only her professional reputation but also critical defense procurement decisions that influenced national security priorities. However, Sarah quickly discovered that leading the diagnostic project meant working directly with a team that included Sergeant Williams and Specialist Burke, both of whom had made their skepticism about her qualifications abundantly clear during her first week. The team also included Staff Sergeant Lisa Chun, a communication systems specialist, and Sergeant First Class David Martinez, an expert in armored vehicle defensive systems. I want to establish clear protocols for our diagnostic approach, Sarah announced during the team's initial planning meeting in Conference Room B. adjacent to the garage bays where the 3 vehicles were housed. We'll need to coordinate testing procedures that examine individual vehicle performance, paired vehicle operations, and full 3-vehicle integration scenarios to isolate where the system conflicts are occurring. Williams leaned back in his chair with an expression that suggested he was preparing to challenge her leadership before they had even begun the technical work. "That sounds like a time-intensive approach," he observed. "Given our 6-week deadline, wouldn't it be more efficient to focus on the most likely sources of coordination problems, rather than conducting comprehensive testing that might not be necessary?" The question was professionally phrased but designed to position Sarah's systematic approach as inefficient or overcomplicated. Williams was essentially arguing that her diagnostic methodology was too thorough, creating the impression that she was wasting valuable time on unnecessary procedures rather than efficiently identifying and solving the real problems. Systematic testing is essential when dealing with experimental integration systems, Sarah replied calmly. The coordination failures could be caused by communication protocol conflicts, defensive system interference, or integration timing issues between multiple vehicles. Without comprehensive analysis, we risk implementing solutions that address symptoms rather than root causes. Burke supported Williams' position with additional technical objections. The vehicle manufacturers provided detailed troubleshooting guides for coordination problems. Following established procedures would be faster and more reliable than developing our own diagnostic approach for systems we've never worked with before. Sarah recognized the dynamic that was developing. Her team members were positioning manufacturer guidelines as more reliable than her analytical expertise, implying that her systematic approach represented unnecessary complexity rather than appropriate thoroughness for experimental systems that didn't have proven track records of reliability. Staff Sergeant Chen had remained silent during the initial discussion, but her expression suggested she was evaluating the technical debate rather than simply accepting either position without consideration. What specific coordination failures have been documented during previous field exercises? She asked, addressing the question to the group rather than specifically to Sarah. Power distribution conflicts during synchronized defensive maneuvers, Martinez replied, consulting his technical notes. All 3 vehicles experience temporary system shutdowns when they attempt to coordinate their defensive arrays simultaneously. The shutdowns last approximately 15 seconds, which would be catastrophic during actual combat scenarios. Sarah reviewed the technical specifications for the vehicle's power distribution and defensive coordination systems, immediately recognizing potential sources of the problems Martinez had described. The defensive arrays require significant power draws that could overload the coordination communication systems if the timing protocols aren't precisely calibrated, she noted. We need to examine the power management algorithms and communication priority settings to identify potential conflicts. Or, Williams interjected, we could follow the manufacturer's recommended diagnostic sequence for coordination problems, which specifically addresses power distribution conflicts in multi-vehicle scenarios. The procedures were developed by the engineers who designed these systems, so they probably understand the potential problems better than we do. Williams had positioned manufacturer procedures as inherently superior to Sarah's analytical approach, implying that her diagnostic methodology represented overconfidence in her own expertise compared to the engineers who had actually designed the systems. It was a skillful undermining technique that was difficult to challenge without appearing to dismiss legitimate engineering expertise. Manufacturer procedures are valuable starting points, Sarah agreed diplomatically, but experimental systems often develop problems that weren't anticipated during the design phase. Our role is to identify and solve real-world operational issues that may not be covered by standard troubleshooting guides. The team spent the remainder of their planning session developing a compromise approach that incorporated both manufacturer recommendations, and Sarah's systematic testing procedures. However, the discussion had established a pattern where Sarah's leadership decisions would be consistently questioned and alternative approaches would be presented as potentially superior to her professional judgment. The actual diagnostic work began the following day with individual vehicle testing to establish baseline performance parameters for each armored personnel carrier. Sarah's testing procedures were methodical and comprehensive, involving sophisticated diagnostic equipment that revealed detailed information about power distribution, communication protocols, and defensive system coordination that wasn't accessible through standard maintenance procedures. This level of diagnostic detail seems excessive for identifying coordination problems, Burke observed as Sarah connected spectrum analyzers and power distribution monitors to the first vehicle systems. The manufacturer's diagnostic procedures focus on the specific systems that are most likely to cause coordination failures. Sarah continued her testing procedures, explaining her methodology as she worked. Experimental systems often develop problems through unexpected interactions between components that appear to be functioning normally when tested individually. Comprehensive analysis helps identify subtle issues that might not be apparent through targeted testing alone. Her approach was proving effective, revealing power distribution anomalies and communication timing variances that wouldn't have been detected through standard manufacturer procedures. However, the more sophisticated her diagnostic work became, the more her team members questioned whether such detailed analysis was necessary or appropriate for their operational environment. Most military mechanics don't have access to this type of precision diagnostic equipment, Williams pointed out during the second day of testing. If these vehicles are going to be deployed to standard military units, shouldn't we be using diagnostic procedures that can be replicated with standard military maintenance resources? The observation was technically reasonable, but strategically devastating. Williams was suggesting that Sarah's sophisticated approach was impractical for real-world military operations, implying that her diagnostic capabilities were too advanced to be useful for the military's actual needs. Chun had been observing Sarah's procedures with obvious interest, particularly the communication protocol analysis that directly related to her own expertise in communication systems. The timing variance patterns you're identifying could explain the coordination failures we've been experiencing, she noted. The communication protocols assume synchronized timing between vehicles, but if there are slight variations in individual vehicle performance, the coordination algorithms wouldn't be able to compensate. Sarah appreciated Chun's technical understanding and professional support. Exactly. The communication timing variations are within acceptable parameters for individual vehicle operation, but they become problematic when multiple vehicles attempt to coordinate their systems simultaneously. Martinez also showed genuine interest in Sarah's findings, particularly regarding the defensive system coordination problems that fell within his area of expertise. If the timing variations are causing coordination failures, would standardizing the communication protocols across all three vehicles solve the power distribution conflicts? It should, Sarah confirmed. But we need to verify that standardization doesn't create other problems with individual vehicle performance. The timing variations might be compensating for differences in power distribution characteristics between the vehicles. The technical discussion was productive and professionally satisfying, but Sarah noticed that Williams and Burke were becoming more resistant to her leadership as her diagnostic work proved increasingly successful. Rather than acknowledging her expertise, they seemed to interpret her technical successes as evidence that she was overcomplicating problems that could be solved through simpler approaches. During the lunch break on Wednesday, Sarah overheard a conversation that confirmed her suspicions about the systematic nature of the resistance she was experiencing. Williams was speaking with Burke near the coffee station, their voices just loud enough to carry to her table in the corner of the break area. She's creating solutions to problems that probably don't exist, Williams was saying. Communication. Timing variations of microseconds aren't operationally significant for vehicles that are designed to function in combat environments where perfect synchronization isn't realistic anyway. Burke nodded emphatically. And she's using diagnostic equipment that costs more than most mechanics make in a year. If these vehicles can't be maintained with standard military resources, they're not practical for actual deployment regardless of how well they perform during controlled testing. The conversation was devastating because it contained elements of legitimate, technical concern mixed with systematic undermining of Sarah's professional credibility. Williams and Burke were positioning her thoroughness as evidence of impracticality rather than competence, suggesting that her sophisticated approach was inappropriate for military operational requirements. Chun approached, Sarah's table carrying her own lunch tray, apparently having overheard the same conversation. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, though her expression suggested the question was more courtesy than genuine uncertainty. "Please," Sarah replied, genuinely grateful for the social contact and potential professional support. Chun sat down and spoke quietly, her voice pitched just low enough that their conversation wouldn't carry to nearby tables. "I wanted you to know that your diagnostic work on the communication protocols has been extremely valuable. The timing variance analysis you completed yesterday identified problems that our standard communication testing procedures would never have detected." The validation was professionally meaningful, but Chun's need to speak quietly suggested that expressing support for Sarah's work carried social risks within the team dynamic. Sarah appreciated the gesture while recognizing that Chun was essentially providing clandestine encouragement rather than public professional endorsement. "Thank you," Sarah replied. "The communication timing issues are definitely contributing to the coordination failures, but there may be additional factors involving power distribution management that we haven't identified yet." "The power distribution analysis you're planning for this afternoon should provide answers," Chun agreed. "But I wanted to ask, are you noticing that some team members seem more interested in questioning your procedures than understanding your results?" Chun had tactfully identified the systematic resistance that Sarah had been experiencing without directly accusing any specific individuals of unprofessional behavior. The question provided an opportunity for Sarah to acknowledge the difficult dynamic she was navigating without appearing to complain about her treatment. "I've noticed some skepticism about my diagnostic approach," Sarah replied carefully. "But that's not unusual when working with experimental systems that don't have established maintenance procedures. Different technical perspectives can be valuable for comprehensive problem solving." Chun smiled slightly, apparently recognizing Sarah's diplomatic approach to describing what they both understood was systematic undermining rather than legitimate technical disagreement. "Well, from a communication systems perspective, your work has been excellent. I hope the team recognizes that." The afternoon session involved power distribution analysis for all three vehicles during simulated coordination scenarios. Sarah's testing revealed that the timing variations Chun had discussed were indeed causing cascade effects through the power management systems, creating the coordination failures that had been compromising the vehicle's operational effectiveness during field exercises. The power distribution algorithms are designed to optimize performance for individual vehicles, Sarah explained to the assembled team as she presented her findings. When multiple vehicles attempt to coordinate their power management simultaneously, the algorithms create conflicts because they're competing for optimal resource allocation rather than sharing information. Martinez studied the power distribution data with obvious professional interest. So the coordination failures aren't caused by mechanical problems or communication errors, but by power management software that was designed for individual rather than coordinated operation? Exactly, Sarah confirmed. The solution involves modifying the power management algorithms to share optimization, data between vehicles rather than having each vehicle optimize independently. It's a software modification rather than hardware replacement. Williams remained skeptical despite the clear evidence Sarah had provided. Software modifications for experimental military vehicles seem like they should be handled by the manufacturer's engineering team rather than field maintenance personnel. Are we qualified to make those kinds of system changes? The question was designed to position Sarah's proposed solution as beyond the appropriate scope of military maintenance work, implying that she was overstepping her professional authority. By suggesting modifications to complex systems that should be handled by civilian engineers, military maintenance personnel are trained to implement field modifications for operational readiness, Sarah replied. The power management algorithm. Adjustments fall within established protocols for experimental systems integration. We have the technical authority and capability to implement these corrections. Burke supported Williams' position with additional procedural objections. Implementing unauthorized software modifications could void manufacturer warranties and create liability issues if the vehicles experience problems after we've altered their original configurations. Sarah recognized that her team members were systematically raising obstacles to implementing her solutions, positioning reasonable caution as evidence that her approach was inappropriate or risky. Despite clear evidence that her diagnostic work had identified the source of the coordination failures, Williams and Burke were finding reasons to question whether her proposed corrections should be implemented. The pattern was becoming unmistakable. No matter how successful Sarah's diagnostic work proved to be, certain team members would find ways to question her leadership, challenge her methodology, or raise procedural obstacles to implementing her solutions. Her technical competence was becoming irrelevant to her ability to function effectively as team leader, because the resistance she faced had nothing to do with her actual job performance. As the workday concluded, Sarah reflected on the uncomfortable realization that her success in identifying and solving complex technical problems was creating additional challenges rather than professional recognition. The more sophisticated her diagnostic work became, the more her colleagues seemed determined to position her expertise as impractical, excessive, or inappropriate for their operational environment. Tomorrow would bring additional testing and the beginning of implementation procedures for correcting the coordination failures she had identified. But Sarah had the growing sense that the technical challenges were the easy part of her assignment, while the interpersonal dynamics would prove far more difficult to navigate successfully. The crisis began at 0347 hours on a Thursday morning, when Sarah's emergency beeper jolted her awake with the piercing tone reserved for critical equipment failures. The message was brief but ominous. Experimental convoy Alpha 7 stranded. Multiple system failures. Immediate diagnostic support required. Report to command center immediately. Sarah dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, her mind already racing through the possibilities. Convoy Alpha 7 consisted of the 3 armored personnel carriers she had been working to repair, plus 2 additional experimental vehicles that were conducting classified field testing exercises in the desert. Training area 40 miles northeast of Fort Kellerman. For multiple vehicles to experience simultaneous system failures during an active exercise suggested either catastrophic equipment problems or coordinated attacks on their electronic systems. The command center was buzzing with activity when Sarah arrived 15 minutes later. Operations personnel were coordinating with the stranded convoy via encrypted radio communications while intelligence analysts reviewed threat assessments for the training area. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Harrison, the exercise coordination officer, was directing multiple response teams from a bank of communication equipment that displayed real-time positioning data for all vehicles involved in the training exercise. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison called as soon as he saw her enter. We have 5 experimental vehicles dead in the water during a classified readiness evaluation. These vehicles represent over $75 million. in advanced military technology, and they're currently sitting defenseless in hostile training terrain, with simulated enemy forces scheduled to begin active engagement protocols in 6 hours. The implications hit Sarah like a physical force. The training exercise was designed to test the vehicle's performance under combat conditions, with opposing forces attempting to disable or capture the experimental equipment using realistic threat scenarios. If the vehicles couldn't be restored to operational status quickly, they would become sitting targets for simulated enemy forces, compromising both the equipment and the evaluation exercise that Pentagon officials were using to make procurement decisions. What specific system failures are the vehicles experiencing? Sarah asked, already mentally organizing the diagnostic equipment she would need for field repairs under combat simulation conditions. Communication systems are completely offline, Harrison replied, consulting status reports from the stranded convoy. Propulsion systems are functional but limited to manual operation without electronic coordination. Defensive systems are non-responsive. Navigation equipment is providing erratic readings. It's like someone flipped a switch and disabled every electronic system simultaneously. Sarah immediately recognized the symptoms as consistent with electromagnetic pulse damage or sophisticated electronic warfare attacks designed to disable military vehicles by overloading their electronic systems. However, the training exercise wasn't supposed to include electronic warfare components that could cause permanent equipment damage. Sir, has anyone confirmed that this is equipment failure rather than electronic warfare effects from the training exercise? She asked. Harrison's expression grew more serious. That's exactly what we're trying to determine. If this is equipment failure, we need immediate field repairs to recover $75 million in experimental vehicles. If this is an electronic warfare attack, we need to understand how our most advanced military technology was defeated so easily. The situation was evolving from equipment maintenance challenge to potential national security crisis. Sarah understood that her response to this emergency would be evaluated, not just by her immediate supervisors, but by Pentagon officials who were using this exercise to make procurement decisions affecting hundreds of millions of dollars in future military contracts. I need a helicopter to the convoy location with complete field diagnostic equipment, Sarah said. And I'll need a team of specialists who can assist with complex electronic systems analysis under field conditions. Already arranged, Harrison. Confirmed. Master Sergeant Rodriguez is assembling your support team. You'll be airborne in 20 minutes. As Sarah hurried toward the helicopter landing pad, she encountered Master Sergeant Rodriguez coordinating the emergency response team that would accompany her to the stranded convoy. The team included Staff Sergeant Chun for communication systems, Sergeant Martinez for defensive systems, and unfortunately, both Sergeant Williams and Specialist Burke for mechanical and electrical system support. This is a career-defining situation for everyone involved, Rodriguez explained as they loaded diagnostic equipment into the helicopter. Success means we've demonstrated that Fort Kellerman's maintenance personnel can handle the most challenging emergency situations involving experimental military technology. Failure means we lose credibility with Pentagon procurement officials and potentially compromise future advanced technology programs. Williams approached Sarah as they prepared to board the helicopter, his expression showing the first genuine respect she had received from him since arriving at Fort Kellerman. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, I want you to know that whatever differences we've had regarding diagnostic procedures, I'm committed to supporting whatever approach gives us the best chance of recovering these vehicles. The statement was professionally appropriate, but Sarah detected an undertone that suggested Williams was hedging his position rather than offering genuine collaboration. If the emergency response succeeded, he could claim to have supported her leadership. If it failed, he could argue that he had expressed concerns about her approaches that had been ignored. Burke showed similar tactical positioning. in his comments as they boarded the helicopter. "This is definitely a situation where we need to coordinate all available expertise rather than relying on any single approach," he said. "Multiple perspectives will be essential for solving problems this complex under field conditions." Again, the comment was designed to position Burke as collaborative, while subtly undermining Sarah's leadership authority. He was essentially arguing that her individual expertise wouldn't be sufficient for the challenges they were facing, requiring group decision-making rather than clear command structure. The helicopter flight to the convoy location took 35 minutes, during which Sarah reviewed technical specifications for all 5 stranded vehicles, while mentally preparing for diagnostic procedures under field conditions that would be far more challenging than garage-based maintenance work. Emergency repairs in hostile terrain required improvisation and rapid problem-solving without access to the sophisticated testing equipment that had been available at Fort Kellerman. The convoy was positioned in a valley, surrounded by rocky terrain that provided natural defensive positions, but also limited accessibility for rescue operations. The 5 experimental vehicles were arranged in tactical formation, but their crews were clearly frustrated by the complete failure of electronic systems that left them essentially defenseless against simulated enemy forces that would begin active engagement protocols in less than 5 hours. Captain Michelle Foster, the convoy commander, met Sarah's team as they disembarked from the helicopter with expressions that mixed relief and urgency. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell, we need these vehicles operational immediately. The exercise parameters include simulated enemy forces with advanced capabilities, and we're sitting ducks without our electronic systems." Sarah began her emergency diagnostic procedures by examining the patterns of system failures across all 5 vehicles. The simultaneous nature of the electronic system shutdowns suggested either coordinated electromagnetic pulse attacks or systematic software failures that had cascaded through interconnected vehicle networks. "The failure patterns are consistent with electromagnetic pulse damage," she announced to her team after completing initial assessments. "All vehicles show identical symptoms affecting electronic systems while leaving mechanical components undamaged. This suggests external attack rather than internal equipment failure." Williams immediately challenged her assessment with alternative theories. Electromagnetic pulse effects would require specialized military equipment that isn't supposed to be part of this training exercise. "Isn't it more likely that we're dealing with software coordination problems similar to what we identified during garage testing?" His suggestion was technically possible, but ignored the evidence that Sarah had gathered from examining the vehicle systems. Williams was essentially arguing that her field diagnostic capabilities were less reliable than his theoretical speculation about software problems. Burke supported Williams' position with additional skepticism about Sarah's electromagnetic pulse theory. If enemy forces had electromagnetic pulse capabilities, they would have used them earlier in the exercise when the vehicles were more tactically valuable targets. "The timing suggests equipment failure rather than coordinated attack." Sarah recognized the pattern that had been established during previous team interactions. Despite clear evidence supporting her diagnostic conclusions, Williams and Burke were systematically questioning her assessment and proposing alternative explanations that would require different response approaches. Chun had been conducting her own analysis of the communication system's failures and approached Sarah with findings that supported the electromagnetic pulse theory. "The communication equipment shows interference patterns that are consistent with high-intensity electromagnetic exposure," she reported. "This isn't software failure, it's hardware damage from external electromagnetic sources," Martinez confirmed Chun's assessment from his analysis of the defensive systems. "The defensive arrays show similar electromagnetic damage patterns. Whatever hit these vehicles was specifically designed to disable military electronic systems through electromagnetic overload." Sarah appreciated the professional support from Chun and Martinez, but she could see Williams and Burke exchanging glances that suggested they were preparing to escalate their resistance to her leadership, despite mounting evidence that her diagnostic assessment was correct. Even if electromagnetic pulse damage is confirmed, Williams argued, the repair procedures for that type of damage are beyond what we can accomplish under field conditions. Shouldn't we be coordinating with specialized electronic warfare recovery teams rather than attempting field repairs that might cause additional damage? Williams was positioning Sarah's repair efforts as potentially harmful, suggesting that her field maintenance capabilities weren't appropriate for the complexity of electromagnetic pulse damage recovery. It was a sophisticated undermining technique that questioned not just her diagnostic assessment, but also her technical authority to implement corrective procedures. The pressure intensified when Lieutenant Colonel Harrison contacted the field team via encrypted radio with updated intelligence about the training exercise. We've confirmed that simulated enemy forces are equipped with electronic warfare capabilities for this evaluation, he reported. Pentagon observers want to know whether our experimental vehicles can recover from electronic warfare attacks under field conditions. The revelation transformed the situation from equipment failure emergency to combat readiness evaluation. Pentagon officials weren't just observing whether the vehicles could be repaired. They were evaluating whether military maintenance personnel could restore combat capability after electronic warfare attacks in hostile environments. This is exactly the kind of scenario where standard repair procedures might not be adequate, Burke observed. Electronic warfare damage requires specialized recovery techniques that go beyond normal maintenance capabilities. Sarah understood that Burke was positioning the situation as beyond her expertise, implying that the electromagnetic pulse damage was too sophisticated for field maintenance personnel to address effectively. However, her diagnostic work had identified specific components that could be repaired or bypassed to restore essential vehicle functions. Electromagnetic pulse damage typically affects specific circuit pathways rather than destroying entire systems, Sarah explained to her team. We can restore primary functions by bypassing damaged circuits and rerouting power distribution through secondary pathways that weren't affected by the electromagnetic exposure. Her repair approach was technically sound and consistent with military protocols for electronic warfare recovery, but it required precise work under time pressure that would test her technical capabilities and leadership authority simultaneously. Williams and Burke continued to express skepticism about field repair procedures that they characterized as risky or inappropriate for such expensive equipment. Chun positioned herself as Sarah's primary technical support, offering expertise with communication systems repair that would be essential for restoring vehicle coordination capabilities. I can handle communication systems recovery while you work on power distribution routing, she offered. The electromagnetic damage patterns suggest we can restore basic communication functionality within 2 hours. Martinez also committed to supporting Sarah's repair approach, focusing on defensive systems that could be restored through similar circuit bypass procedures. The defensive arrays should be recoverable once we restore power distribution to the primary control systems, he confirmed. However, Williams and Burke maintained their resistance to Sarah's leadership even as time pressure mounted in Pentagon. Observers waited for evidence that military maintenance personnel could handle electronic warfare recovery under field conditions. Their systematic questioning of her procedures was consuming valuable time and creating team coordination problems that complicated the already challenging repair work. Every minute we spend debating repair approaches is a minute less for actually implementing solutions, Sarah pointed out, her frustration beginning to show despite her efforts to maintain professional composure. We have less than 4 hours before simulated enemy forces begin active engagement, and these repairs require systematic coordination rather than continued discussion of alternative approaches. Williams responded with additional procedural objections. That effectively positioned Sarah's sense of urgency as evidence of poor leadership judgment. Rushing into complex repair procedures without adequate planning and coordination. Review could cause irreversible damage to experimental equipment. Worth millions of dollars, he argued. Sarah realized that she was facing a crisis that went far beyond technical challenges. Her ability to restore the experimental vehicles to operational status was being systematically undermined by team members who were prioritizing their skepticism about her leadership over the mission requirements that Pentagon officials were using to evaluate both the equipment and the personnel responsible for maintaining it. The stakes couldn't be higher, and time was running out. With less than 3 hours remaining before simulated enemy engagement, Sarah made the decision that would define not just her career, but the entire Pentagon evaluation. Ignoring Williams and Burke's continued procedural objections, she began implementing electromagnetic pulse recovery procedures that drew upon training and experience that she had never disclosed to her Fort Kellerman colleagues. I'm implementing Protocol 7 Alpha for electronic warfare recovery, she announced, opening a specialized section of her toolkit that contained equipment her team had never seen before. The instruments were military-grade hardened diagnostic tools, designed specifically for battlefield electronic systems recovery, far beyond anything typically available to standard maintenance personnel. Chen looked up from her communication systems work with obvious surprise. Protocol 7 Alpha isn't covered in standard military maintenance training, she observed. That's specialized electronic warfare recovery training that's only provided to personnel with specific security clearances and operational experience. Sarah connected her specialized diagnostic equipment to the first vehicle's damaged electronic systems, revealing the true extent of her technical capabilities for the first time since arriving at Fort Kellerman. Her movements were precise and confident, demonstrating familiarity with procedures that required years of specialized training and practical experience under actual combat conditions. Where exactly did you receive Protocol 7 Alpha training? Williams asked, his skepticism now mixed with growing uncertainty about Sarah's background and qualifications. Multiple deployments with Task Force Omega, Sarah replied without elaborating. Her attention focused on the complex electronic systems recovery procedures she was implementing. Electronic warfare recovery under hostile fire conditions requires different approaches than garage-based maintenance work. The mention of Task Force Omega sent visible shock through her team members. Task Force Omega was a classified special operations unit that conducted electronic warfare operations in the most dangerous and technologically challenging environments worldwide. Personnel assigned to Task Force Omega represented the absolute elite of military technical specialists, selected for capabilities that went far beyond standard military training. Martinez stopped his work on the defensive systems to stare at Sarah with obvious amazement. Task Force Omega doesn't accept personnel without at least 5 years of combat electronics experience and completion of the Advanced Electronic Warfare School, he said. Those are some of the most difficult qualifications to earn in the entire military. Burke's expression showed the first genuine respect Sarah had received from him, mixed with obvious embarrassment about his previous dismissive comments. Task Force Omega personnel are usually assigned to classified operations that he began, then stopped as he realized the implications of what he was saying. That require security clearances and technical expertise significantly above standard military maintenance levels, Sarah confirmed, continuing her electronic systems recovery work without interruption. The vehicles we're working on incorporate technology that Task Force Omega has been field testing under combat conditions for the past 3 years. Williams had gone completely silent, apparently processing the realization that he had been systematically questioning the technical judgment of someone whose qualifications exceeded his own by several levels of magnitude. His earlier comments about Sarah's diagnostic procedures being overcomplicated or unnecessary now appeared to demonstrate his own limitations rather than her inappropriate approach. Sarah's electronic warfare recovery procedures were revealing the true extent of the electromagnetic pulse damage while simultaneously implementing corrective measures that restored primary vehicle functions with remarkable efficiency. Her specialized training allowed her to identify and bypass damaged circuits through techniques that weren't covered in standard military maintenance manuals. The electromagnetic pulse attack used frequency modulation specifically designed to target the coordination protocols we've been working on, she explained as she restored power distribution to the first vehicle's essential systems. This wasn't a random electronic warfare attack. It was a targeted assessment of our experimental vehicle's vulnerability to sophisticated electronic threats. Chun had been observing Sarah's recovery procedures with growing professional admiration. The precision of your circuit analysis suggests you've encountered this specific type of electromagnetic pulse signature before, she noted. This looks like you're implementing countermeasures based on previous operational experience. Task Force Omega has been developing electronic warfare resistance protocols for experimental military vehicles since 2019. Sarah confirmed. The electromagnetic pulse attack patterns we're seeing today are consistent with threat scenarios we've been preparing for during classified operations overseas. Martinez found his voice again, though his tone now carried profound respect rather than the casual dismissiveness he had shown during previous interactions. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, are you saying that you've been conducting classified electronic warfare operations while assigned to Task Force Omega? I'm saying that the electronic systems recovery procedures I'm implementing were developed through operational experience with similar threats under actual combat conditions, Sarah replied. Diplomatically, the vehicles we're working on represent technology that has been tested and refined through real-world deployment scenarios. The transformation in team dynamics was immediate and complete. Williams and Burke, who had spent weeks questioning Sarah's qualifications and challenging her technical approaches, now found themselves observing someone whose expertise operated at levels they hadn't imagined existed within military maintenance operations. Burke approached Sarah's work position with obvious humility. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, is there anything I can do to assist with the electronic warfare recovery procedures? I realize I may not have the background for this level of specialized work, but I'm willing to help however I can. The difference in Burke's tone was remarkable, from systematic skepticism to genuine deference based on recognition of expertise that exceeded his understanding. Sarah appreciated the offer while continuing her complex repair work under extreme time pressure. I need someone to monitor power distribution readings while I reroute the primary coordination circuits, she said. The procedures require constant adjustment based on individual vehicle electrical characteristics. Williams positioned himself to assist with the monitoring equipment, his earlier confidence replaced by careful attention to Sarah's instructions and obvious respect for her technical authority. The power distribution patterns you're achieving are significantly more stable than anything we accomplished during our garage testing, he observed. Electronic warfare recovery requires optimization approaches that prioritize operational reliability over maximum efficiency, Sarah explained. The coordination systems need to function under degraded conditions rather than optimal laboratory performance parameters. As Sarah completed electronic systems recovery for the fourth vehicle, the distinctive sound of military helicopters approaching the convoy position drew everyone's attention toward the horizon. 3 Black Hawks were approaching in formation, carrying personnel whose presence would transform the entire situation from emergency maintenance operation to something far more significant. The lead helicopter touched down 50 meters from the convoy position, and the figure who emerged immediately commanded the attention of everyone present. Four-star General Patricia Morrison stepped onto the desert terrain with the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of military service at the highest levels of command responsibility. General Morrison moved directly toward the convoy, position where Sarah was completing the final electronic systems recovery procedures, flanked by 2 Pentagon officials and a small security detail. Her presence meant that this emergency maintenance operation was being observed and evaluated at the highest levels of military leadership. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, General Morrison said as she approached Sarah's work position, her voice carrying clearly across the convoy area. I understand you've been implementing electronic warfare recovery procedures under field conditions. Sarah stood at attention and rendered a crisp military salute, though her hands still carried the precision tools she had been using for electronic systems repair. Yes, ma'am. Electronic Warfare Recovery Protocol 7 Alpha for experimental vehicle. Systems damaged by electromagnetic pulse attack. General Morrison returned the salute with equal precision, then moved closer to examine the diagnostic equipment and recovery procedures that Sarah had been implementing. Her expression showed the kind of professional recognition that could only come from someone who understood the complexity and significance of the technical work being performed. Protocol 7 Alpha represents some of the most advanced electronic warfare recovery training available to military personnel, General Morrison observed, speaking directly to Sarah but clearly intending her comments for the assembled team members and Pentagon officials. Implementation under hostile field conditions requires both exceptional technical competence and proven operational experience. The assembled personnel, Williams, Burke, Chun, Martinez, Captain Foster, and the Pentagon officials listened with growing understanding of the true nature of Sarah's qualifications and the level of expertise she had been applying to their maintenance challenges. General Morrison continued her assessment of Sarah's work with obvious professional satisfaction. The electronic warfare recovery procedures you've implemented represent exactly the kind of technical capability that Task Force Omega has been developing for protecting our most advanced military technology against sophisticated electronic threats. Williams and Burke exchanged glances that conveyed both amazement and profound embarrassment about their previous treatment of someone whose qualifications operated at levels far beyond their own experience or understanding. The systematic questioning and skepticism they had directed towards Sarah's technical approaches now appeared to demonstrate their own limitations rather than her professional shortcomings. Ma'am, Captain Foster interjected, Staff Sergeant Mitchell has restored operational capability to all 5 vehicles under extreme time pressure and field conditions. Her electronic warfare recovery procedures exceeded every expectation we had for emergency maintenance operations. General Morrison nodded approvingly. Staff Sergeant Mitchell's assignment to Fort Kellerman was specifically requested by Pentagon officials who needed advanced electronic warfare expertise for evaluating experimental vehicle systems. Her background with Task Force Omega makes her one of approximately 12 military personnel nationwide with the qualifications necessary for this type of specialized work. The revelation hit the assembled group like a physical force. Sarah hadn't been assigned to Fort Kellerman as a routine personnel transfer or to fill diversity quotas, as Williams and Burke had suggested. She had been specifically requested by Pentagon officials because her unique qualifications were essential for the Advanced Technology Evaluation Program. Burke found his voice first, though his tone now carried profound respect and obvious regret about his previous behavior. General Morrison, I want to apologize for not recognizing Staff Sergeant Mitchell's exceptional qualifications during our previous work assignments. Her expertise clearly exceeds anything we're accustomed to working with. Williams nodded emphatically, adding his own expression of professional regret. Ma'am, Staff Sergeant Mitchell's technical approaches that we questioned were actually more sophisticated than our standard procedures. We should have recognized her superior expertise rather than challenging her leadership. General Morrison's expression suggested that she was well aware of the team dynamics that had been affecting Sarah's work at Fort Kellerman. Military effectiveness depends on recognizing and utilizing exceptional capability wherever it exists, she said diplomatically. Staff Sergeant Mitchell's success in restoring these vehicles under emergency conditions demonstrates exactly the kind of technical excellence that our advanced technology programs require. Sarah had completed the electronic systems recovery for all 5 vehicles, restoring full operational capability with 45 minutes remaining before the simulated enemy engagement was scheduled to begin. The vehicles were not only functional, but operating at performance levels that exceeded their pre-attack capabilities due to the optimization procedures she had implemented during the recovery process. General Morrison conducted a brief operational test of the restored vehicles, observing their coordination and electronic systems performance with obvious professional satisfaction. The electronic warfare recovery procedures have not only restored operational capability, but improved the vehicle's resistance to future electromagnetic pulse attacks, she noted. One of the Pentagon officials accompanying General Morrison approached Sarah with obvious respect for her technical achievement. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, your field recovery procedures will be documented as standard protocol for electronic warfare resistance training across all experimental vehicle programs. The professional recognition was gratifying, but Sarah appreciated even more the transformation in her relationships with her Fort Kellerman colleagues. Williamsburg, Chun, and Martinez were now treating her with the kind of respect and deference that reflected accurate understanding of her qualifications and expertise. 6 weeks later, Sarah sat in her new office at the Pentagon's Advanced Technology Evaluation Division, reviewing classified briefing materials for her promotion to Master Sergeant and assignment as Senior Electronic Warfare Recovery Specialist for all experimental military vehicle programs. The promotion had come through with unusual speed, accompanied by commendations that referenced her performance during the convoy emergency and her demonstrated leadership capabilities under extreme operational pressure. Her new position involved coordinating electronic warfare resistance development for military vehicles that represented the cutting edge of defense technology, working directly with Pentagon officials and defense contractors who were developing the next generation of combat systems. The work required exactly the kind of specialized expertise and operational experience that she had been applying at Fort Kellerman, but now in an environment where her capabilities were recognized and utilized appropriately. A knock on her office door interrupted her review of the morning's intelligence briefings. Staff Sergeant Chun entered with a warm smile and a coffee cup bearing the Pentagon insignia, apparently having received her own transfer to the Advanced Technology Division following the successful convoy recovery operation. Thought you might appreciate some colleague-bearing caffeine, Chun said, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk. I heard about your promotion to the Senior Electronic Warfare Recovery position. Congratulations on what appears to be a very well-deserved advancement. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, appreciating both the gesture and the opportunity to reconnect with someone who had demonstrated genuine professional support during the challenging weeks at Fort Kellerman. Thank you. And congratulations on your own assignment to the Communication Systems Development Section. Your work on the convoy recovery was exceptional. Chun smiled, settling back in her chair with obvious satisfaction about their new professional circumstances. It's refreshing to work in an environment where advanced technical capabilities are recognized and valued rather than questioned or systematically undermined. They shared a laugh that carried both amusement and relief about their previous experiences at Fort Kellerman, though Sarah had learned through informal channels that the convoy emergency had resulted in significant changes to personnel evaluation and team dynamics at the Motor Pool Division. What happened to the others after the convoy operation? Sarah asked. Curious about the outcomes that had followed their departure from Fort Kellerman, Chun's expression became more serious as she provided updates on their former colleagues. Williams received formal counseling about leadership and collaboration deficiencies, along with mandatory training on recognizing and utilizing specialized expertise. Burke was transferred to a different unit with notation in his personnel file about professional development needs. She paused, sipping her coffee before continuing with information that was clearly more sensitive. But the more significant outcome was institutional. Master Sergeant Rodriguez submitted comprehensive recommendations that resulted in new protocols for advanced personnel integration and expertise recognition across all experimental technology programs. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, understanding that her experience at Fort Kellerman had been documented and analyzed as evidence for broader policy improvements that would benefit other personnel with specialized qualifications who might face similar challenges in the future. The interesting part, Chun continued, is that General Morrison's evaluation report specifically credited your professional resilience and technical leadership under adverse conditions as exemplary of the kind of capability the military needs for advanced technology operations. Sarah appreciated learning that her difficult experience had contributed to positive institutional changes, though she was more satisfied by the knowledge that she was now working in an environment where her capabilities could be utilized effectively. For important national security missions, their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's secure telephone, which displayed a caller ID indicating communication from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She answered professionally, then listened for several minutes before thanking the caller and hanging up with an expression that mixed surprise and professional satisfaction. "Everything all right?" Chun asked, noting Sarah's thoughtful expression. "That was General Morrison's office," Sarah replied slowly. "I've been requested to serve as technical advisor for a congressional hearing about advanced military technology effectiveness and electronic warfare preparedness. Apparently, the convoy recovery operation has been documented as a case study for military technical excellence under emergency conditions." Chun raised her eyebrows appreciatively. From experimental vehicle maintenance to congressional policy advisor in 6 weeks. That might be some kind of professional advancement record. Sarah laughed, though she was still processing the implications of speaking to congressional leadership about military technology policies based on her operational experience and technical expertise. The briefing is specifically about electronic warfare resistance capabilities rather than personnel policies. She noted, "The focus is on operational effectiveness and mission readiness, rather than individual career advancement." The distinction was important because it positioned her experience as evidence about military technical capabilities rather than personal achievement, though Sarah understood that her testimony would influence policy decisions affecting both technology development and personnel utilization across all branches of the military. That evening, Sarah returned to her Arlington apartment, reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her from systematic professional dismissal to congressional policy consultation within a matter of months. The transformation wasn't just personal, it represented institutional recognition that technical excellence and operational competence were essential for military mission success, regardless of individual characteristics or social assumptions. She opened her laptop and began preparing notes for the congressional testimony, understanding that her presentation would influence policy decisions affecting military personnel and technology development across all defense programs. The responsibility was significant, but she approached it with the same professional competence that had characterized her performance throughout her military career. As she worked late into the evening, Sarah reflected on something General Morrison had told her during their brief conversation after the convoy recovery. Military service tests your ability to maintain professional excellence regardless of external circumstances or other people's limitations. The goal isn't to change everyone's mind, It's to perform so professionally that competence becomes undeniable. The recognition from General Morrison and the subsequent career advancement had been personally meaningful, but the real victory was simpler and more fundamental. She had maintained her professional standards throughout, circumstances that tested both her technical competence and her personal resilience, contributing to institutional improvements that would benefit other military personnel facing similar challenges. The story of her experience at Fort Kellerman would become part of military institutional memory, serving as evidence that effectiveness requires organizations to evaluate personnel based on demonstrated capability rather than preconceived assumptions. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and different challenges, but Sarah approached them with quiet confidence earned through proving that excellence speaks louder than prejudice, and that true professional respect must be built on authentic competence rather than social accommodation. In the end, respect wasn't given, it was earned through consistent demonstration of capability under pressure. And once earned through genuine expertise rather than political correctness, it became an unshakable foundation for continued professional growth and meaningful contribution to missions that mattered. The wrench in her toolkit had become a symbol, not just of mechanical expertise, but of the kind of authentic technical leadership that made everything else possible. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell had found exactly where she belonged, and the important work continued. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.